in this presentation in the past, we use music and other means to create imaginaries and exotic others to expand imperialism and colonization in the Americas and also in the rest of the global South. As part of the music community and the artistic community of today, we constantly encourage our students and colleagues to be imaginative and to continue to create new social imaginaries. But how can we protect ourselves and our students from the harms of new forms of colonialism and expansionism and imperialism in the process of creating these new imaginaries? And these are open questions. You guys, any of you can answer it. And please feel free to answer another question if you want to. Yvette.
Is this on? Oh, it is on. Good morning, everyone. Buenas. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Giving thanks to those whose shoulders we stand on. And, you know, I've been sitting here and holding back my tears. For starters, thank you. It is a gift to us. And I say us because I place myself in this book. I am the granddaughter of a Congo woman, the first Cimarrones that kicked the colonialist butt, that stopped the enslavement of Africans from coming through Latin America. I am that, Portobello. I am the granddaughter of 3 Silvermen from Barbados, Jamaica, and Martinique, who built the Panama Canal. I am the daughter of one of the members of the Bomberos de Corneta y Tambores de Colón, Felix Modestin, Mayor Modestin, who my father's name is the name on the trumpet room in the Cuerpo de Bomberos de Colón, 66 years, till he passed away 3 years ago. I am the student of Professor Trim, piano, Professor Cobham, and Professor Prescott, who you mentioned. I am a Zonian. I am born and raised in the American territory of Panama. So I am of Panamanian and Caribbean and have direct, I am a direct visual example of Jim Crow and imperialism and colonialism in Panama. I am the apartheid of Panama. What many don't know is this territory held American laws till 78, way past Brown versus the Board of Education and way past desegregation. I am born into that as a child that was late 60s. So I'm a child of Jim Crow, of American Jim Crow in another land. I only saw white people till 78. I grew up in a predominantly black community. Patricia spoke about Pedro Miguel and Paraíso, which was the Pacific side. I am the Atlantic side, which was Rainbow City. I am from the community that Luis Russell comes out of. I am the community where Princess Aurelia comes out of. I am the community where all those folks, other than Danilo, he's Panama, but Colón, which was the center of blackness in Panama. I am that. And if you know me in Boston, then you know why I do what I do, because I come from that. I don't call, when you think about imperialism, and then I want to pass it on, I don't call the invasion an invasion. It was an occupation. There was the military bases were already there. They didn't have to fly in, they were walking across the street to invade us, to look for a man that they created since 1966, because Manuel Noriega was an informant to the CIA under the first Bush, and then by the second Bush, he was like, nah, I'm keeping this to myself. So I think it was not an invasion, it was an occupation for us who were there and what happened to us. My father being, aside from being the mayor in the bomberos, my father I'm also fifth generation of Modestin, Durants, Robinsons who worked on the canal. I too worked on the canal as a high school student. That Daddy was the chief of Panama Canal Security in the Gatun locks, which is the largest locks on the Atlantic side of the canal. And we didn't see folks for weeks in the invasion. So the US was implementing the same segregation, racism, colonialism here somewhere else. And some of us lived it. We don't just talk about it, we lived it. I saw my parents not get jobs because it was written in the books that black folks could not supervise white folks. I saw myself not get homecoming queen because they didn't want another black girl get homecoming and prom queen. I mean, like that's, and I graduated in the late 80s. So that's how long this lasted. And as you know, Danilo, this territory was so imposed in our country that it wasn't until 1964 that they raised the Panamanian flag next to the American flag, and that was after students were killed for going up the Ancon pole to put the Panamanian flag up. So I'll leave it that. This is, Patricia, you're using music to tell our story, and it's so part of who we are. You know, when Daddy passed away 3 years ago, and I started looking through my albums, and I found the range of stuff, and I was taking pictures and sending it to everyone in the States. I'm like, this is why I know this, because I listened to this growing up. So thank you for this gift.
You know, I thought you were describing my hometown, Hosky, North Carolina. But you know, actually, what you just spoke about is really the basis of the point I'm going to try to make here, and that is when we think about our students and we think about the creative process moving forward, and how we would like our students to see the world anew and to see possibilities and to think of ways they can innovate across the board. How do we keep from repeating those acts of appropriation, imperialism, colonialism? Is we start by knowing the history, right? You can't think about colonialism if you don't know what it is and how it exists and why it was built and how it was built, right? We can't avoid doing that again because we live in a world where white supremacy permeates everything we do, right? We can't get away from it. Whether we know it or not, it's the water we swim in. It's the land we live in. That's why your story was so, it could have been, you know, I mean, I'm actually a little older than you. So you said you were born in the late 60s. I was born in the early 60s, right? So I certainly understand Jim Crow and segregation. I was born 8 years after the board, Brown v. Board of Education in Arkansas and all of that. So, you know, I think that's the first thing. We have to educate ourselves to the world. You know, there's a movement now to rewrite history and strike the unpleasant parts of our history from the books, from the text, to ban these books from elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, under the guise that somehow a 7-year-old is learning critical race theory by learning about Harriet Tubman, right? I mean, it's quite ridiculous, but this is what we're up against. So if we want to keep from repeating those same steps, we have to learn what the steps were in the first place and the depth of them and the intentionality of them. None of this is by accident. Racism and white supremacy was not an accident, right? And so I don't want to, you know, go back to popes in the 1500s and all of that, but, you know, learning more about it will help us prevent it from reoccurring.
I also want to thank you, Patricia. My own background is as a historical musicologist, and I study music and empire. And in addition to the passion and depth that you obviously bring, having a text that lots of people can read is so powerful. Not everybody's going to get to meet you or be in conversation with you, but this is a way that you are able to circulate these important histories, but also your argument that you're forwarding here. And so I want to thank you for that. I came to music with a big M in a couple of different ways. Some of them were at home with my grandmother, who was a sort of amateur songwriter and poet. And she sang mostly in a style that was sort of devotional, but influenced by South Indian classical music. But I discovered so-called Western music through a children's choir at my local park district when I was about 9 years old. And that was how I learned what we call the Western canon and Western harmony and things like that. And I think it affected me in my body, and I loved to sing. I loved to sing with people. And it wasn't until much later, I was in college, when I encountered the movement that we might call exoticism in Western music. And I'm slightly ashamed to share this, but I think it's important to say it. I just drank in these works, mostly sort of 19th century, mostly French, composers who had encountered the other through colonial expedition or because the World's Fair was in Paris and there were new sounds for them. And it was the first time that I felt I could see anything of myself in this canon. Much later, I almost came to despise those works for all the reasons that you can imagine, the kind of power differentials, the appropriation, the one-sidedness of them, the ways in which the representation was demeaning, frankly, and limited and on purpose, as we say, right? But that was my journey through those works. And I realized that those first few listens, those were like crumbs. And I'd been so hungry to see myself. And I think all the time when I have the privilege of hearing these students and all the work that Danilo and Marco and your faculty do, how I wish I could be a student now, and how different my journey through my musical engagement would look like had I been exposed and opened to different ways of harmony, to different scales, different ways of hearing and playing with others, because I had these few exposures and I shaped my worldview through them. That was what I had. And so I just want to come back again to thank you for offering this book, but also the music that you make as a way of broadening the world for all of those who get to engage with it.
So I'm David Carrasco, and I'm a historian of religions. I teach at Harvard, and don't hold that against me, though. I went to the University of Chicago. As a Mexican American, when you go to places and there's Mexican Americans, people of color in the audience, and you say you're at Harvard, some of them are going like, "Are you a sellout or a vendido, or what are you?" There's always a suspicion, and that suspicion is normal, because the fact is that Harvard, when they hire people like me, they often see a chance for what I call ornamental descent. You become an ornament of the place, and then what you have to do is you then have to make sure that you bring other people into that situation. I was actually hired at Princeton by Toni Morrison, after you heard me speak about Toni Morrison. And Toni Morrison and I then became partners. We traveled together, we worked together, and we were always trying to make sure that we enlarged the opportunities for other people, so that we actually felt like we had occupied Princeton for a while. It was like an occupation, and it led to things. And so, and during my experience at Harvard, I met Danilo and Patricia. And Patricia was, let me tell you a story about her. Patricia was in a class I was teaching, which was about, it was called Religion Around Toni Morrison and Garcia Marquez, both who I met, and in fact I introduced them to each other. And then it's called Lives and Writings. And in this class, Patricia was in the class, and we were reading Toni Morrison's novel Jazz. She wrote a novel called Jazz. And in the novel Jazz, she uses jazz as a form of writing. In other words, she writes not only about jazz, the writing is jazzy writing. So in our little class, we had another professor at Harvard who thought he knew about jazz. He told me he knew about jazz. So I said, well, come in and talk about jazz to the students and how it relates to this novel. But I also said to Patricia, Patricia, why don't you follow up and talk about jazz? So he came in and he gave this sort of ABC talk, which didn't tell us anything about jazz or the novel. And then Patricia made a presentation. It was a fabulous presentation by somebody who not only who knew jazz, but she could read the novel and find out where there were certain jazz moves in the novel's writing. And it was so, unfortunately, the other professor had already left because it would have been too embarrassing because it went from ABC to jazz, as a lived experience. So I think that this was the beginning of my awareness of how far she could go in teaching and writing. And now we have this fabulous book right here that I think should be in paperback already, so I can teach it to students at Harvard. And I don't know if you've looked into the book. I don't know if you talked about the book this morning. Okay, so I don't have to go through that. But I mean, you look at the title, Reimagining Panama's Musical and Cultural Narratives of Jazz. See, everybody thinks that Panama's only important for what goes through it.
Exactly.
But the fact is, the people that were there when things went through it, they took some of that stuff and they put it together what was already there. And here you need this crucial reimagining, which you've done. And so you've asked this one question here about, about imperialism. I'll just say a few words about this and how to resist it. I took a lot of notes when I was reading your book this morning. So when I think of you and Danilo, I'm reminded of Albert Camus. And Albert Camus, people don't know it, he wrote a book called The Rebel. And it was about his notion of rebellion, or in Danilo's and Patricia's word, resistance. And one of the things that he said is that in order to really be a rebel, you had to have, not only in your words, but in your life, a certain vocabulary. And the first word in the vocabulary for the rebel, according to him, is the word no. You got to be able to say no in all kinds of ways, in strategic situations. And we've heard some of that already in the presentation. You got to be able to say no. And you have to say no to oppression, racism, whatever anti-thing there is. You've got to be able to say stop. We're all in situations where we hear little anti-Semitic, anti-Arab, anti-Mexican, anti-Panamanian stuff. And usually we just look away, and I don't want to get involved. And Camus said, no, you got to say no. You got to say stop in some important ways. But he says, look, if all you got is no, he said, if all you got is no, you're still allowing the oppressor to set the agenda. Therefore, you got to have another word in your vocabulary, and that's yes. You got to also be able to say yes. You just can't be going around saying no all the time, protesting here, raising hell here, and so on and so on. We need that. Toni Morrison used to say that during the streets action, she wasn't out in the street. She said, you needed the street action. You needed that no. She said, what I wanted to do was keep a historical record. I had to have a historical record. So she began to help African Americans write their books because she knew that was going to last longer than some of the protests. And that's why this book is so important. And so what Camus says is you got to have this yes. Now, I was here the other night, thank you for the ticket, when I came to hear the big musical thing. And I came here and I stayed here the whole time. And afterward, I didn't want to leave. Matter of fact, every time I come to Berklee, I don't want to leave. Why is that, man? Because I want to hang out with you. I want to hang out with you. I never want to leave. I want to be here. It's so different. It's so different than being at Harvard. I can't tell you. I love the Harvard students. Harvard's all right. Yeah. So, but she ran away too. But coming here is a whole different thing. So I'll stop in a second. But what my man Camus is saying is that one of the things you got to say in the yes, which my brother was over here saying, is you got to learn all about him. You got to learn all about it. My teacher, my African-American teacher at the University of Chicago, Charles Long, says, he says, one of the things you got to understand about the slaves and the colonized, he said, they're colonizer watchers. They're watching the colonized all the time. And they know all about the colonized. And they also know about themselves as colonizers. And the yes is putting all that stuff together. The colonizer will go around, he said, and they'll pretend like, oh man, we don't, them people, they're not even people, we don't pay attention to them. So, but the colonized person is a colonizer watcher, see? And that's what Camus says you gotta be. And that is only out of this no and yes, out of this attitude, that the new music is gonna come. And the way the new music comes, says Camus, is by focusing on the lives, experiences, and the potentials of people who have undergone the colonization. Because only if you undergo it are you going to really be able to say no and yes. And it seems to me on the stage here, and in this book, you have a lot of that awareness. So studying the history, the lost history, what you call the secret history. I like that term, the secret history. And so the question is to you, why were they keeping it a secret for so long? And thank you for unmasking it. So that's.
Oh, fantastic. I want to be brief about what I'm going to add, but I think regarding the question you asked, I think you have heard from here how music throughout the history was a form of building resilience, building connection, being strong about it, learning to say no, and using music as a soft power, sometimes as a direct power, sometimes in an indirect way, to be able to speak something that the colonizer couldn't understand because they changed the words and the meaning. But they could only understand. And you know, in Panama, they speak backwards, and you don't understand anything, but yes, we do understand. I forgot, I need to practice. Patricia said, what the hell are they talking? I saw it backwards. And it was created as a form of resilience, to send messages. That's one thing that I think is important, how music becomes so important in terms of, for therapy, for gathering, but also, you know, when I was 10 years old, I noticed how music dismantled the idea of capitalism in 2 seconds. And I'll give you an example. My dad and I used to play a lot, jam at home, and we had a problem with the washing machine, one of those washing machines that we had, we were trying to preserve because we didn't have any more money in the budget, you know, and the machine was like, and it finally broke down. The guy came in, he worked all day on it, and around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, my dad would like to jam, so we start jamming. And when the guy is getting, you know, he's standing up like, okay, I need to get paid and I need to get out because I work 7 hours. My dad went and got a shredded carrot and gave it to him. And he was, no, just give me my money, you know. And my dad said no. And the guy was like, I don't play music. My dad's like, yeah, try the güiro, you know, try it. And the guy slowly, and then, you know, I was 10 years old, I was playing with him, I was jamming, I'm looking at him, and it's transformation in front of my eyes. And he dropped his back and everything. And with that güiro, he just got into it. And my dad was smiling. We finished the jam. And my dad said, okay, how much we owe you? And the guy was like, he was like shaking. He's like, I can't charge you. If anybody had to pay, here is me. And I was 10 years old, and I was saying, a little güiro experience just shifted the whole idea of I get paid for the work I do. Music is something, man. I was like, wow. So believing in that potential of music with information, with the opportunity to learn, to do what I call correction, historical correction. We need to start rewriting the new narrative And that's what Patricia has contributed here. But we must not forget that when we are dealing with music, we are dealing with an incredible opportunity that I call work in progress for the greatest potential to become more human. And that's stuff that comes out of you when you hear an incredible piece of music, that you experience something called freedom and creativity to what you do that is transformative, that it has the potential to impact you in profound ways like this. Viewing education as an important form of social activism in the 21st century is a must. That's all I had to say.
Geez, there's so much. I don't even know. Just, yes, the Congo communities at home, we still have the language and we speak the Spanish backwards, and that was created so that the colonizers would not understand the movement. What people don't realize is Panama really set up what was happening in the Americas, the Congos, the free Africans. As I told Dr. Louis Gates, who I wrote a piece for Bayano for the encyclopedia, and he was like, he was a slave. I said, no, he wasn't. I don't know about you, but in Panama, he wasn't, you know? And I'm staying with that. Bayano, Mandinga, y Filipino. Those are the story, the history that we learned. But music was so in Portobelo, the Congos, where the Black crisis, that's such a part. Ola de la mar. I mean, the drum is such a part of our culture. You can't go anywhere in Colón, in Portobelo, in Bocas del Toro without hearing the drum. But in Colón, with the bomberos, they were on 9th Street and Central. And what a lot of folks don't know, and I had shared with Patricia, is that when you worked for the American government and you retired, not only did you have to leave your job, you had to leave the territory. So you were absolutely displaced from all the rights that were in this territory, and then move to the Panamanian section, which could be from here to that door. It wasn't like some far thing. It was like crossing a street. So my uncle didn't work for the Canal Zone government, so my cousins couldn't come to the movies with me. Police officers were American police officers, so they would stop you, arrest you if you didn't have your ID that showed that you were a Zonian. They gave us everything except citizenship. And I was born in the same hospital as John McCain in this American territory. And they did not give us citizenship, and their way of hiding that was to then give us residency. A lot of us that were born in this American territory, for me, for instance, when I came to Boston as a college student, I already had my residency because I was born in the American territory, and instead of giving us citizenship, they gave us residency, which is why I fight for reparations. U.S. owes us. You owe us what you did to my grandparents, my parents, and to me. And to me. So, but the bomberos were such a part of our culture. Like literally, you heard pa-pa-pa-pam, and everybody in Colón was out of their house. No one was inside till this day when I just went home. They marched in New York in October, and we were all, I don't care where you were, as you were Panamanian, you heard the bomberos at Colón were coming and marching, you were there. It was raining this October, but we were still there. They were such a part of who we were. And the music. But what I always want folks to understand, I didn't learn to be Black when I came here. I didn't learn Black love, Black music, Black resiliency, Black presence when I came here. I knew it from the moment I was born. I was born into that mindset to hold my head up high by a Martinican man who I didn't know was illiterate till I was in high school, that my grandfather had come, you know, he lied about his age when he got on that ship from Martinique to come for the construction of the canal. He was only 16. But it was, you know, Daddy would take us. So one of the things that Patricia said is that a lot of the musicians, they started in the banda de bomberos, but then they became the musicians that had the small groups, the small jazz groups, Mr. Cobham, the Prescotts, all of them had their small groups. So we would listen to them march in the band and then go at night to whatever restaurant or club and have them play jazz and calypso. You know, I called my uncle this morning and he was giving a whole list, and I said, I'm on the panel with Danilo. He's like, but I thought his father had passed. I said, no, it's his son. Known. You know, like, so we, you know, like, we knew this stuff. It wasn't removed from us. Like, people talk about Rubeng, and it's like, no, he's Blades, not Blavis. Let's be right, you know, because he does have that Caribbean background. And I mean, we still are doing what you are saying right into reggae, because a lot of people don't give us credit. Reggaeton, reggae in Spanish was born in Panama, in Colón, from the same American territory that Patricia speaks of, because when we started to hear Bob Marley, we wanted to translate what he was saying because we were living it in this American territory, where my uncle, who's one of the leaders of the Rasta movement, would have his locks cut off by the American police officers who would see them walking in the American territory coming to our house. So the music was our way of responding, standing, owning who we were. So I heard salsa and merengue, reggae, and then I had to hear patois, French Martinican music, dame a tibo, etibo, quatibo, dudu. Every Bastille Day, for an uncle that was the president 29 years of the French Société in Cologne, I celebrated Bastille Day and sang every Martinican calypso song you could think of. You know, so we were very unique. I know of this. I was trying not to fan on you because, you know, if you know Toni Morrison, you know you. But we also already, when I came here for college, our American high school in this territory also matched Panamanian school. So I went to American school, but our last year in school was considered our first year in college. When I came here to very good schools, and I'm not gonna call out their names, they didn't know what to do with me. Because they would hand me Toni Morrison and Alice Walker, and I'm like, I already read them. And they were like, but you came from Panama. Yes, from an American high school with a, you know, so we were so direct to hear that when we came here, it was just a confirmation, not an introduction.
Can I just add a couple? For the ones that were in Panama, and that's why the Panama Jazz Festival is so important, because it's a shift of symbol. It's taking something that was so oppressive to our country and shifting it into a productive area where a new narrative and new knowledge is created. So that I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and that is the City of Knowledge, where we do the massive event where, you know, usually we have between 25 to 30,000 people. That used to be a place where the U.S. soldiers used to align, you know, during 100 years of that military occupation and train.
We go to the base. Where you have your jazz festival was an American base, that even if you were in this American territory and you lived in the canal zone, you couldn't go to that base. So when I go home now and I see Fort Clayton and Amador, we could not, even though we were Zonians, but that was the predominantly white space, could not go to that space. which was only a street from who we were. That's how the US played this out. So now when we go home, when I'm home and we get to go to these spaces, I think of the amount of black Zonians who got killed and beaten and raped in this territory for just being. For just being. So when you do your jazz festival, you're standing on so many people that got killed by this structure in our country that was imposed on us, that we still remember very vividly today.
Yes, and I actually talk about this in the last chapters of the book about the Panama Jazz Festival, that there has been always a lot of resistance to do the festival in this space, because this space was a space of war and violence. And Danilo and I have always been connected to the field of music therapy, because this is what I studied here at Berklee. And we thought that, you know, moving to this space, which we were told not to move many, even the president of Panama at that time tweeted publicly, you know, why is the Panama Jazz Festival moving to this place? Nobody's gonna go. Nobody's going there. It's not gonna happen. It's never gonna flourish. But, you know, we believe that music actually, you know, is therapeutic at every level possible. It's therapeutic as an individual level, it's therapeutic as a community level, but it's also therapeutic in the land. It's geographically therapeutic. And we think with music you can not only literally change and help your brain, but also the brain of nature, the brain of the space, the relationship between you and the space, the relationship, you know, the relationship of the earth with its own history. So because, and we really believe that, because otherwise we would have never done anything like this. And after 20 years and over 10 years doing it at the City of Knowledge, we believe the place still needs healing, but is in progress. In progress, it needs a lot more work, but we are working on it, and we're working as a diaspora, as a Latin American diaspora, Afro-Panamanians and also Pan-Afro-American, you know, Pan-Afro-American movements are helping heal that land and the history and the relationship with it. And this is also one of the big reasons why we want to continue to be there, because we need, I think, a lot more healing to do. And music, what a great tool we have to do the healing. I want to go to the next question. After this next question, I'd like to also open up for people to give us questions. So I'm gonna propose a question. In the quest to create narratives that justify past social injustices, many historical accounts have to be erased, especially if we want to maintain the status quo. The history of the Pan-African movements within jazz and the relationship to Latin America, as expressed in the presentation, are counter-narratives to the histories well known to our ears. How can we create counter-narratives based on true stories that are hidden, disguised, and erased, that will also set us free?
you know, you know, Danilo and Patricia have heard me say this so many times. I believe music is a superpower, right? And, you know, even in my faith, in the scriptures, it talks about the power of music. Culture, if you look around the world and see the power of music. But even if we look in contemporary times, we recently had an occasion where a singer was singing a song and the people were dancing in such unison that it showed up on the Richter scale as an earthquake. Right? Did you read about that? Have you heard of it? Yes, yes. Taylor Swift was doing a concert and the people were moving in unison and it showed up on the Richter scale as an earthquake. You can sing a song and cause an earthquake. I don't know. Does that sound like a superpower? I mean, does that sound like a superpower? Like you can sing a song and cause an earthquake. All right? So when we think about changing narratives, to me, I always think about what's the tool that we have in our hand, right? We all have different roles. We all have different goals and objectives in our lives. What's the tool that we have in our hand? So I look at the power of music, performing arts, and how it relates to our lives as a pathway to changing narratives, right? Patricia's book was born out of music. It's now in a documented form that can spread beyond her saxophone playing, as great as it is. But after a while, it'll just be recordings of, but that book telling the story will go on. So I think when we think about changing the narrative, we each have to look at our role and our individual power, our individual agency. You know, you were talking about, you call them colonial watchers. What was the term you used? Colonial watchers. Right, right. Which I found, it tickled me, because coming from the South, that is exactly how they taught us. That's how they taught you how to survive. That's how I was able to get out of a Jim Crow town of only 4,000 people and come to Berklee and travel around the world.
What town was it?
It's Ahoskie, North Carolina.
So the guy who said this is from Little Rock, Arkansas.
Right, same thing, same parallel, right? Right. As a matter of fact, my family name, Savage, there were 2 Savage plantations in the U.S., one in North Carolina and one in Little Rock, right? So if you meet a black person named Savage, most likely their families originated from one of those 2 plantations, right? So it's all there together, you know. So that is actually how I learned. Racism, bias, hatred are very predictable, right? I was taught to anticipate, not to expect, because I was taught to want the best out of people, to be optimistic. But I was taught to anticipate what would happen in case of racism, whether it's in school, whether it's how to protect myself in a police beating. I mean, they taught us all this in the basement of my church, right? And so I look at our individual power, our individual agency, right? How can we use, and it's for each of us to figure out. I don't think there is one way of changing the narrative. I think it's going to take all of our ways. I think we all have a role in it, and I think we all have a responsibility to change that narrative. It's not just up to 1 or 2 people. There will be leaders, of course, but, you know, when I speak to the global students, I always say, we invested in you. We brought up all these great musicians. We're investing in you. This is not just for fun. We're not bringing up John Patitucci and Brian Blade and Terry Lynn Carrington, all these people, Lettucey, all the people who come here and visit. They're not just here for fun. We're investing in you and what you have to bring to the world because we expect the best out of you. Because we believe in your talent, we believe in your intelligence, and we believe in your creativity. So to my advice or my thought on it is, we each have to find our way of using our tool, what's in our hand, to change the narrative to make the world a better place.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'll tell you a little story how. So my father is from the Mexican border, and in terms of being taught, I remember when I was 7 years old, 8 years old, we drove from Dallas to El Paso, which is where his family, our family's from, Juarez. And we were going along the road, and we stopped at a roadside diner, is where I got the message. And he said, look, when we go in here, we're going to try to go in here and eat. He said, but we got to sit at the counter. And I said, well, why? He said, because we're Mexicans. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, no, we got to be able to see the food that they make. Because sometimes they'll put glass in the food as a way of telling Mexicans you don't belong here. So I was like, wow. He said, but we're really hungry, so we're going to go in this place. So he went and sat at the counter so we could see the food that we only order food they would make right there. You know? And it was the first time I saw a sign on the wall. It had a gun and it said, no Mexicans or dogs allowed in here. But we got in and so forth. So this was the beginning of my education about public spaces, because I was growing up in Maryland and there were no other Mexicans around, but we always go back to El Paso every year. You know? Now, what this taught me in terms of racism, began to teach me, was that for me, as I learned later, racism, as I said before, it's really a cosmology. You know, it's not just some bad people doing shit. It's not just some people here got some attitudes. Racism and what the Panama Canal, all that story, is because there's what I call a cosmology. In every cosmology is a narrative, and every alternative narrative has to have a cosmology. Every cosmology has three things. It has a creation story. And the creation story they tell about blacks and browns and mixed race people. It has a creation story. And in that creation story, there's always going to be a hierarchy. There's always going to be some sort of hierarchy. And that hierarchy that's there, is going to have at the top of the hierarchy some divine being. So when people talk about the inferiority of Panamanians or blacks or women, if you push them enough, they're going to say, well, God made it that way. Or that's the way nature has it, you know. This all he didn't want to go back to the 16th century. I'll go for him. The great debate that takes place in Spain. This is an official debate that sets in line the cosmology of racism. You know, on the one side, you got this big philosopher named Sepulveda, and he writes a 500 pages. I mean, think about it, 500 pages. See what she's up against. 500 pages. And it's a 500-page Socratic dialogue that basically says that God made these indigenous people and the slaves inferior. It's not because we're not beating them up and making them slaves because we don't like them. We're doing this because God created them this way. See, so that's the creation story. So if you're going to go up against that creation story, you better get yourself another creation story, see? And what they're saying about Panama, they're really creating another creation story. This is a creation story that you were telling, see? It's not just a story, it's a creation story. Matter of fact, when she first started speaking, I was interested in a phrase she used, and she said, I am the community. She used that phrase. I am the community. See, that's a creation story. Second thing you have in a cosmology is you have to then have sort of a map of how the world's going to be organized. And this is where the hierarchy comes in, really. So what they developed to justify what they did in Panama is a thing called the Great Chain of Being. And the Great Chain of Being is this hierarchy. At the top is God. Then there's the angels. Then there's the saints. Then there's the white people. Then there's the black people, maybe in the human. Indigenous people, they're not in the human. they make black people not human by making them slaves. They think. So they organize things. It's not just the beginning, but the organization. She was saying about where you can't walk across the street, you see, because they've organized a society in order to tell people you don't fit in, you don't have a place. And that was the big thing I grew up. The black people, brown people didn't have a place, you see. So the third thing you have in any counter-narrative or narrative, which is what this book is trying to do, is you have to have something about destiny. You got to have something about destiny. That is the future, where we're going. Now, if you listen to these other people, their creation myth, they want you to go to make America great again, which is right back to their creation story, is what that means. We want our future to go right back again where it started. That's what the whole thing is about, see? So this narrative has to have a different view of the future. And that's what I hear Danilo saying, and if everybody's saying here, is that you've got to listen to the secrets. See, because what Charles Long taught me was that in these creation stories, and these new creation stories, in your jazz, what I heard here the other night when I happened at Berklee, in this creation story, there's always a secret. And what is the secret? It's the secret of creativity. And the people that know the secret of creativity are the ones who tell the new creation story. They're telling their secret of creativity. See? And the only people who know the secret are the people who play that music. That's how you learn the secret that these people have laid down. And so she's unmasking the secrets, so with the new secrets, and we got to be careful that somebody doesn't come along and try to put it under corporate control. Because once the corporate control gets it, then the next thing you know, the secret is a brand. And we don't want no damn brands about this.
That was amazing. I'm just going to follow you around now. I just wanted to say one thing. I love this cosmology, David. I'd never heard it put that way. I think one caution in the spirit of unearthing voices that have been lost, is there's an impulse to do what we might call a minority history, right? A biography of a great singer, like Marian Anderson's biography, for example, right? And there's a way that you can do that what you're actually doing is trying to climb that organizational structure, right? You're not actually trying to topple it. You're just trying to get up higher in it. And that's not necessarily the spirit that you're talking about here, right? The kind of evening out or co-creation or exploding that idea of hierarchy. And so that's the caution, right? Is to not simply try to climb the ladder for your own benefit or for the benefit of your subject, right? Look, this person is as great as Mozart, right? You've kind of lost if you've done that, right? Because you're preserving the idea of individuality and greatness and genius in a very particular form, post-Enlightenment kind of European form, right? But when you tell the story of communities and intergenerational trauma and healing, you've already upended that idea, right? Maybe a year or two ago, when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's scoring record was about to be broken, there were these great interviews with him that were like, "Are you upset?" And he was like, "Why would I be upset? It's 20 years ago I won $1 million, and today somebody won $2 million. Now we both have a lot of money, And it got me thinking about this idea of precarity, right? That we feel like there's only so much history to go around, and so we better get our part of it, right? But what I love about what you've done here is say there's so many ways to see this if you open your ears. And by doing so, you actually enrich the whole story, right? You're not actually taking anything away. And Ron, you mentioned this before about banning books, right? Because, if we tell that story, then we can't tell this one, right? But there's not actually a limit on how many stories you can tell. Multiple things can be true at the same time, right? We can sit in the discomfort of what that means. So again, just thank you for giving us the space to do this in a different way.
So I want to This is the parade in the Banda de Bomberos in New York, marching down the streets of Brooklyn. Without knowing your breakdown, that's what we were raised to do. We were raised to counter that story from birth. And I say I was raised to do it. I was the first black cheerleader when we integrated. My family was the first black family to move into Margarita, which was one of the widest of spaces on the Atlantic side. One of my mentors is here, and I saw him come in late. I've been writing about this. I haven't written my own yet, my own. Women Warriors of the Afro-Latina Diaspora, I speak of this. The Afro-Latino Reader, which is, I speak of this. First 2 books ever to center the Black Latino experience. One, all women, and the second one, Afro-Latinos from around the country wrote on. And then, I'm an artist because of this. I'm a poet, don't play the instruments anymore, but lover of music, and recently wrote a play that I incorporated a lot of these elements that I grew up seeing in Panama, that just ran at the Museum of Science last Friday, and it was sold out. So the response is, we are always, if you meet one of us, you'll know, because we don't hold back our story. We don't tippy-toe around it. We don't give credit where it's not due. So I think it's important for us to continue to tell it. My mentor that's here is the co-author with me of the reparations ordinance that was just passed in the city of Boston. Dr. Jemadari Kamara, is he here, Baba? Stand up. There he is. So that's a response to your question. I am going to continue taking space, sitting at tables, to make sure when you speak of Panama, when you speak of Pan-Africanism, when you speak of centering blackness, that you include Panama, that you include the American story of Panama in the American story here. If you really want to understand why this issue of the migrants is even happening right now, is to understand how this country plays a role in the countries of the people that are migrating. It is not an accident. So our response to walk with your book now is, here it is, and this is this. So when I open this book and they say, the Mr. Chilcott that you mentioned in the book was a leader in Rainbow City who walked the streets of Rainbow City with Martin Luther King, that I have a picture of. I have the picture. So that's gonna be like, people don't, Patricia wrote it, but here it is. But we know it. I can show you the pictures. So I think it's gonna be up to us to continue, Baba, I have a piece that I'm supposed to finalize for a book that he's doing. That's the 3 stages of resistance in Panama, which was the colonial, Afro-colonial stage, the Afro-Caribbean stage, and our current stage, which we now have a Black History Month in Panama, which is in May, which started as May 30th, which was the day slavery was abolished in the territory, founded by my mentor, Clara Richards, who's from Puerto Armuelles and of Caribbean descent in Chiriquí, which is, if you know that, that's a, so we just need to tell our story. And I know, Don Jose Maso, when I came here, and I wanted to be like, you don't know where Panama is? You don't know why I speak Spanish? You don't know why my name is French? Then you need to be educated. And that's why I started Encuentro Diaspora Afro, because I was like, how do you not know all of this when you've had your foot and your elbow to a Panamanian of Caribbean descent's knee and life for 100 years? This territory was in Panama for 100 years. So how are we not going to tell our story? So thank you. I'm excited. I'm excited what this can do to my generation, that we will see ourselves in this book. I'm excited for the next generation, because this is not just about music. This is about politics. This is about race. This is about land. And this is about place. Because to have that jazz festival in a territory where we could not walk in is not just about music.
I remember one of our friends in Panama, she's a writer too, Marixa Lasso, who was studying with Patricia in Harvard. She came home to hang out. My dad was there. And she started to talk about the book that she was writing, which is called Erase, which was a group of indigenous people who basically were erased for the convenience of building the canal, which was sold as a prosperity to our country, but actually to United States. And every time I have that memory of that story, I remember one time Wayne Shorter leaving me a message and say, "Hey, Danilo, what's up? How you doing?" And then he called again, "Hey, man, you didn't answer. Hey, anyway, I just want to tell you, United States, man, they gotta give thanks to Panama. They have to do a public acknowledgement that they would not be United States without Panama. Okay, I'll see you later." You see it as a joke, you see it as and then we talk about it. He said, "Danilo, the money that we made for 100 years out of Panama, that builds the potential to become what we became." And not only that, he said, the symbol, when under the circumstances of France and Europe, the great power, not being able to finish the canal, the United States did it. Those are very strong forms of putting yourself at the leadership role. They knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing, and this is a great design. Take the word great out, sorry for that word, but it's a fantastic, well thought out design. And the design goes all the way for me to actually, when I was a kid, question myself about why am I looking the way I am. My mother's a little lighter, my dad is black. And when I said, what am I? I'm being forced to say I'm a morenito. My grandmother will question me and said, "Why are you bringing those people home?" And I say, "What do you mean, those people?" I say, "Those black people." And I say, "Grandma, I am black, no?" She said, "No, you are morenito." Oh, okay, I don't get that, but all right. Explain me. And the way she explained to me, I could just see now, like I see it, with all the great love that she was able to put on. She made great food. She treated me really nice, but also came with a design. It came embedded with a lot of bias and licks. There was a lot of 2-5 on it. A lot of 2-5. There was a lot of 2-5 on it. And I grew up like that. Although my dad did the training in Cologne. That's where a lot of the philosophy we talk about at Global from the fundamental come from Cologne. So when I come to Berklee, I do a survey. That was one of the first time, I don't know if you remember, that they were trying to figure out the different descendants and all of that. And they didn't have many, there was no like many different, spaces. It's like black and white. So I get in line and I explain my case to the student, to the person that was there. Say, my mother is like from Spain, like Italian, she said. I explained it really well, trying to find out Morenito, So I explained, and she's looking at me like this. And I probably took a long time explaining everything, trying to get it right. And she looked at me and said, black, next. I called my mother, I said, Mama, you told me I was a Morenito. There was not a category, a Morenito. Where do I fit in? She said, no, the gringos, they're always making stuff up. The gringos are making up, okay. Then I go on. Then I start working with all these people with Dizzy Gillespie, and they welcome me as a black individual. Then my second project, I want to talk about this slave trade, and I want to make a record about that. And I study about slavery, and I'm very serious about it. And I started going on concerts and tour, playing this music, and I get up, I'm here talking about this historical event. And the audience were like, oh yeah, great. We're going to talk about racism today. 1994. And I started, like the capture, the arrival, the whole thing. Half of the crowd leaving. And then one guy comes and said to me, come here, let me talk to you. You Latino? I said, yeah, you didn't play any Latin music. You know black? I was like, really? And I asked him why. He said, because you don't speak English very well. I said, damn. We are confused now. I'm like, okay. So now I'm going on and on. I record Thelonious Monk and all of that. Well, forget the journey. That didn't really there was a very clear confusion for me because the critics were going crazy. These guys talking about something new, 5-star downbeat, this and that. And my gigs were paying $500, $200 to bring a quintet to LA. So I'm confused. How do I keep this narrative going? So years went by, until finally I am on the road with Roy Haynes. And he said, Danilo, I'm going to give you a test. And if you fail, I'm not going to call you anymore. The great Roy Haynes. Who was the person who brought me to the jazz scene, who took me to New York and opened the jazz world to me. I said, Lester Young. He goes, eh. I was like, oh, two more. Charlie Parker, eh. Sarah Vaughan, eh. And he told me, you don't know your history. You don't know your history. And I'm like, but who was it? Oh, a Panamanian. He still have the letter. He showed me the letter that he still keeps because a Panamanian took Roy Haynes from Boston to New York. And still to this day, if you call him, if you mention that name, for him is what changed his life. And he says, the fact that you're from Panama and you don't know that, we have problems. It has to come from a form of a smack or a slap from the person that I was looking up as a figure of hierarchy. And he told me, no, there's somebody on top of me that you don't know, and he's from Panama. What an incredible lesson. His name is Luis Russell, from Bocas del Toro, Luis Russell, who had the greatest group along with Duke Ellington and Fletcher Henderson. And this is a story, that what Patricia does in here is to document events that if they're not documented, we can still live in a fantasy of a witch. Like, oh, Danilo is so passionate and optimistic about this idea that he created an imaginary that actually Panama has anything to do with the birth of jazz. He's so passionate about it that he could convince you with that. But now we have a document that actually is written that confirms that's right. And what is so beautiful about that document is that you're going to see also that Louis Armstrong and Louis Russell had a relationship. And when Louis Armstrong came from Europe, that New Orleans sound that he was looking for was in the Louis Russell Orchestra. And his manager, talking about the gatekeepers and the people that are the business, like you were talking both, Joe Glaser came out to him and said, hey, Louis Armstrong and your orchestra together. He go, perfecto. He said, yeah, but one problem. What is the problem? We need to change the name from Louis Russell Orchestra to Louis Armstrong Orchestra. That was a big problem for me. And he did it because of the community. He felt that he owed to his musician to have work. And Louis Armstrong can offer more work when they got together. And that narrative changed right there from Louis Russell Orchestra to Louis Armstrong Orchestra. And we never heard of this man. It's not documented in the books as this happened. So documented what happened, rewriting, correcting history, I think is an important part of the pursuit and for all of us. Thank you.
In the circles at home, Luis Russell is named El Pionero. Exactly. He's the pioneer. We at home in the musical world, he's labeled as the pioneer of the jazz movement, at least from owning it from a Panamanian perspective.
So I have a lot more questions, and I knew this was going to happen, that the time would run so fast. It's like double time when, it's almost 2:30. So I want to give some time maybe for a couple of questions from the audience to the panelists. So I have 2 mics here. If anybody wants to ask a question, this would be the moment, because again, I have many questions, but we won't have much time. So I want to give that chance for somebody in the audience. And Jose?
I guess I'll break the ice. Follow me, somebody, please. Don't let me be the only one. I don't know if I'll use the microphone only because, we're in person. So let me take a moment. First of all, I'm going to ask you a question. Then if you permit me, I want to just share a comment.
Yes.
Question.
But if you can use the mic, that would be great. It's
just
because
record.
we're streaming.
You're recording. All right. Question.
Yes, it's for the streaming.
Thank you. Patricia, some may call this an academic book. Others may call it a historical book. As I read your book, I thought, and I shared this with you Sunday when we spoke, how has been the response on the part of academics, academians, those who are, quote unquote, as David said, the gatekeepers of our stories, to a book such as yours that changes the narrative of the history of this great music known as jazz?
Well, on one side, a lot of people like the book. Most importantly, to me, the people that I love and I care about and I admire who are here in this panel like the book. That is the most important, including, my friend Jose here. But also there are academics who do not like the book so much. And this is because I made a decision about writing what I was going to write and how the process of writing the book. And the decision was to include as many writers from Panama and other places from the global south that may not be considered academics. Apart from also relying on the oral history of Panama, of Panamanians in jazz, which this is to what Sindhu was saying, that I don't feel like I'm writing anything new, because people in Panama know exactly what it is, what is the history of jazz. So there is nothing new about this story. It's just that I have to put it together because it's all over the place. But and we put it together in one format because, again, people in Panama know very well their history. There are actually documentaries on it in Spanish, in other languages, which usually don't get to, North American. And I think one of the things that happened also, that the inclusion of academics and scholars and Afro-Panamanian women and the stories of Afro-Panamanian men and the exclusion of mainly white male writers of the history of jazz has caused for many people to not like the book. This is something that I made a decision about because I learned a lot actually from Professor Carrasco, who introduced me at some point, introduced us to Toni Morrison, to her writings, for example, and herself actually at Harvard before she died, and also, of course, Danilo's, Wayne Shorter's, all of the history of jazz that is there, and Ron Savage, who actually was my first teacher here at Berklee in 1996, and all the stories, all the stories that Yvette is telling from Panama. I thought they were much more essential and important for this story to be told than the history of jazz that has been told so far.
Did you hear what she just said? So you've heard the term truth to power. What this book does speaks truth to power. And it's serendipitous, if you will, that today, March 1st, Patricia, you're presenting your book as we start celebrating Women's History Month. And where we're celebrating the women who are so upfront in the front line when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, history makers and barrier breakers that you see right here. Let's first and foremost, I ask you, give Patricia and the others a big round of applause. Patricia, if you allow me, Ron, you speak about music as a superpower. They say that jazz and music is the universal language. I believe that you will agree that those who understand that language and to speak that language understand the responsibility that comes with that language. David, you speak about why it is you feel so comfortable being here at Berklee, and I don't hold you being at Harvard against you. On the contrary, I applaud that you're at Harvard, that you're a change maker, and that you are one of the voices that is shaking the system and the status quo. Without you there and others like you, Harvard would be just white bread. And thus, I applaud that you are there, and I thank for your service there at Harvard. So don't think that any of us hold that against you. On the contrary, we celebrate you. We celebrate you. We celebrate you. But that being said, David, the reason I think that you feel comfortable at Berklee, and I mentioned this to these two young men, Joel is a drummer for the touring musical of Pretty Women that's taking place downtown from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He wished and dreamt that he would come to Berklee, but he didn't. And so today, being here at Berklee, along with another one of his partners, who is an electric guitar player. Give me your name again. Ben, both of them part of the touring group, decided to come to Berklee today, and they are in our presence, and we thank you for taking time from your tour to be here this afternoon. I said to them, and David, you're a living angel, as are the others who are on the stage, as are all of you who are in any kind of art, regardless what the discipline is. And I believe that. I truly do. I believe that the superpower above, when she created human beings, gifted us with living angels who, through whatever art, poetry, drama, dance, sculpturing, painting, theater, music, composing, singing, whatever it might be, whatever that art, your gift to us is love. What you give us through your passion every day is give us humanity. It's connecting us to each other as human beings, and therefore the maximum expression of what love is. And so, David, you feel comfortable here because you're surrounded by living angels every time you walk in here. Every time you walk into Berklee, there are nothing but living angels around you. And so I believe that this book is now what I would call before and after this book. There was a before this book was published. And that was the history and the narrative of imperialism, of racism, of a country imposing its will upon another country. And now there's the after, which brings out to light the important role that the Isthmus of Panama plays, not just in Panama, but throughout the world. Throughout the world. And so when we speak about this book, you rightly said, it's not just about music. It's about history, it's about people, it's about spaces, it's about race, it's about culture, it's about politics, it's about connectivity. We have to unlearn what we have learned, to learn what we need to learn, to know what we need to know when it comes to history. Every one of us, regardless if I'm from Puerto Rico, if you're from Panama, wherever we're from, the history we've been taught is the history of the imperialists that wants us to believe their narrative of the world. And the reason why this book is the before and the after is because those folks that Patricia, in my opinion, got offended is because she's saying truth to power. And so that narrative is one in which someone from Puerto Rico can understand. Fort Clayton, for me, is Vieques Island in the archipelago of Puerto Rico. The fact that you have decided to do a festival in Fort Clayton, for me, is a celebration of Vieques now being part of the archipelago of Puerto Rico, no longer being part of the United States Navy. So I applaud that you made a purposeful decision to say, let's do the festival here, because we do need healing. We do need healing. The African proverb says, until the story of the hunt is told by the lion, the hunter will always be glorified. All of you are lions, and you're telling our story. You're telling our story. And so, in my role as a member of this community, as a communicator on radio, it's important for me to uplift that story. To connect it in a way that the narrative of the past, where it says jazz in the influence of Afro-descendants from the Caribbean, you start off with Mario Bauza and Chano Pozo and Dizzy Gillespie. You start off with Mongo Santa Maria and Willie Bobo with Cal Jader. You start off with Wanty Soul and Duke Ellington. And that's the chapter. My role is to uplift and make sure we understand that the book is broader than that. That includes the Louis Russells and the Frank Andersons and the Clarence Martins and all the others who have been celebrated in your book. And that's just the beginning, because if you had 10 more chapters, you probably put 100 more names to add to that. So we need to make sure that we don't embrace the history as, oh, it's Afro-Cuban. So therefore, the Afro-Cubans are the ones that made, excuse me, hold on a second. Oh, it's Afro-Puerto Rican. And the Afro-Puerto, hold on a second. All of us have played a role. That chapter is inclusive of all. It doesn't take away from all of them. It adds to the beauty of all of them. It makes it even richer because of this chapter. So there's a before this book and an after this book. So as a communicator, it's important for me to communicate this every time I can when I'm on the radio Saturday nights. But also, and I say that truthfully, Because the reason why you're on the air is not just to play music, it's to educate, to inform, and to mobilize, and to create community and movements. The last thing I want to say, I'm also on the board of trustees of the Boston Public Library. If you were here earlier when we had the presentation, you mentioned that there's a special code if you go to our webpage so you can get a discount. This book it costs some money. But my role then as a member of the Boston Public Library Board of Trustees is to make sure that this book is in 25 different libraries throughout the city of Boston, so that it is accessible on the part of the general public at no cost other than just having a library card so you can take it out and read it. Because this is too much an important book for us not to have it accessible to the general public. Okay? And then in my role as a member of the Board of Trustees of the Boston Public Library is to make sure that we do the same thing that you've done here. We do it at the RAB Auditorium at the main library, the main branch down the street at Copley Square, for hopefully sometime around September or so, in which we could, again, have Patricia share the book, bring the group, musicians who are excellent, by the way, to share the music, the story that goes with the book, and have a conversation with the general public about this important book. You're watching and you're witnessing and you're in the presence of history. Don't take this lightly. Don't take this moment as if it's just another moment where I went to a conversation with my professors and invited guests and oh, wasn't that nice? My friends, this is transformative. This is deep. This is going to change the narrative of how we speak about our music and the role of those who are African descendants, and in particular that came from the West Indies into Panama and from Panama here to the United States. This is deep on all aspects. Culturally, musically, politically, socially, academically, we are witnessing a transformative moment in history. We're witnessing a transformative moment in this city in particular. We're witnessing a transformative moment around the world through the Global Jazz Institute and the work that they're doing. So don't take this lightly. When you leave here today, don't think, oh, yeah, no. You were in the presence of history-making moments that will change the world. And if there's ever a moment that we need this type of work and energy to come from this collective of living angels and you, it's now. And so therefore, I urge you, please share this knowledge that you have from this book. Make sure that others become part of those who are reading and uplifting this book. And share the gift that you have as a living angel so that way humanity in the future will be one of peace, love, happiness, and joy and harmony. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Wow. Yeah, that's deep. I think, he left it up there. Maybe the students, we still have classes for the rest of the semester, so I wanna give a space to maybe do some final remarks and then finish the panel because I know there's more classes coming out, and I would take over the entire afternoon if it wasn't because we have to follow the schedules. But some last remarks from anyone that wants to talk, it would be great.
I don't know. This is not just a book story. This is a real story. And this is my constant work that I talk about, write about, advocate about. But it's not often that we get to sit and own the fact that we are the story. So today, I am the story. And we still have so much more to tell. And I am deeply, deeply proud to be Panamanian, deeply proud to be of Martinique and Jamaican and Bajan descent. And although it was a twisted experience that was imposed on us, it made me who I am. And I've never been told to bow my head to anybody. And I won't start doing it now.
Well, I just, in closing comments would say that that story is unfortunately not unique, right? Throughout the diaspora, there's that story. And so as we move forward, what's going to be the story moving forward? And what's going to be our each of ours, our individual contribution to that story? Because it's important to know this history. It's also important, as we talked about earlier, not to repeat it. Right? I mean, you talked about people being erased, or maybe Danilo, right? That's my town. My town was Ahoskie, North Carolina. It's the only city in the world with that name, because the Ahoskie Indians lived there. They were put on the first state plantation, reservation in the United States. It wasn't federal, it was a state. And when they got all the Ahoskie Indians on the reservation, they killed every one of them. Every man, woman, and child. There are no more Ahoskie Indians. But that's the name of my town, Ahoskie. Every time I say that, that's in the back of my mind. It was so rough that the Native Americans went into slavery rather than be known as indigenous people. Can you imagine that? It was easier in slavery than it was to be indigenous. So these stories throughout the diaspora are not unique. So you understand you're not alone. There are people, right. We have to tell these stories. But it's so important because I like to be an optimist. I believe deeply in knowing history. I really do. Because as you were talking about kind of finding yourself through music, I think many of us have that experience. For a while I was, if you know Ralph Ellison, you'll know this reference. For a while I was invisible. While I was in college, I was invisible. I went through life, it was pretty cool, actually. No one could see me. No one could hurt me, most importantly. No one could treat me poorly because I was invisible. So as we tell these stories, as we share these stories that go throughout the diaspora, it's important to remember our common humanity and set forward to change the narrative. That's what we all, people always say, we got to change the story. We got to change these stories. We got to change these experiences, these perspectives, these outlooks, right? And we all have power to contribute in that way. And so that's, I guess, my closing comment. Let's do something. Let's do something about it. Let's do something about it, right?
So my closing comment is to read something that Patricia wrote in the book. As a matter of fact, it's the last paragraph before the epilogue. It's amazing, these words that she wrote. As we navigate the modern era, we see deeper and deeper analogs for improvisation in our disorganized and chaotic institutions. That's Harvard right now, Harvard, man. But such is the world we have created for new generations and the jazz identity we have constructed. As we have learned from Wayne Shorter, chaos is not necessarily something unfavorable, but an opportunity to change. Quote, life is the ultimate adventure. Failures are beginnings, and resistance is fertilizer to him it to turn the poison into medicine creatively. Tragedies are temporary. The only constant is change. Then back to Patricia. It is our obligation to figure out now how to reorder the chaos, continue forging redressing actions, and nurture more radically loving new generations of musicians that care about each other and the world around them. Wow.
When I was talking about erase, that was the book. That was my grandfather's story. He was part of that community, and he told the writer Marisa Lasso, and my father was telling the story that my grandfather was from that place, and he said that my grandfather told him, he said, when they go through that area of the canal, he would say, son, you have privilege that I didn't have. And my father said, really? He said, yes, because I can't say where I came from. I only can sense where I came from, but I don't know where I came from. It was erased. As we gather together today, we should make a unanimous consensus to work in avoiding this type of erasing in history. And sedation. And be very active about how education can become a new form of sedation too. You can be sedated by excess of education. An education that's triggered to keep you in this cave of knowledge. We have to work together to use education as a new form of social activism, to change mind, to change the course of history. And like in the movie of The Truman Show, we can start to understand that maybe what, as Wayne would say, the fairy tales is actually reality. Our fairy tale, what we believe, what we dream of, is actually the reality. And the reality is the fairy tale. So as we are here, I really invite you to go think about everything that happened today and ask yourself, what will be my position from now on? And how can I be of support for the generations to come? Because we can only leave things in life. We can't take anything with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and big round of applause for all these amazing panelists, Ron, Yvette, Danilo, David, Sindhu. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank to the students. And we will keep seeing you in the next week. Thank you.
Hey, sister.
Your words in the